Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
You know, one other thing, Michael, that strikes me is that you go through life, and as you're going through that, you're dealing with the same kind of changes in age, expectations. You know, it's I'm single, and then I'm married, and then I'm not married, and then I'm married, and then I'm stayed married long enough to have kids, and then I have kids, and then I get divorced. I mean, you go through all this stuff, right? And then you get to where you're older, and there are subtle changes, and you've gone through enough to actually understand more deeply what someone was saying in a song like we're talking about. If you don't have the life experience to really actually see that, then some songs aren't gonna hit you. And there's a reason to just go out and party when you're young. And depending on the demographic, those people, the younger demographic goes out and spends money to watch those kinds of acts. Mm-hmm. And now we don't have to spend money. Used to, people would spend money, and that is what kept the kinds of music and integrity and artistic effort and belief alive, because people could make a living doing it, and now they can't. Mm-hmm. And so the music gets made that where anybody can make money, you know. Nevertheless, that same audience goes along and then they get divorced and they have kids. You know, like they're like, well, that was really good, actually. You know, this. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. That really is part of it. Where you are in life, experiencing some of the music that we're talking about, even when it's just fun. Mm-hmm. You know, there's those subtleties of it make you go, ooh, man, okay, now I get it. I didn't get it before. That was just a nice lyric. It just sounded good, but now I get it. You know?
Now it hits home.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, exactly. I remember Conway Twitty saying that, you know, when it came to picking songs, mm-hmm. what he looked for was a song, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, mm-hmm. but what he looked for were songs that a guy could put the quarter in the jukebox, and the lyrics would tell, his significant other what he was feeling or thinking or what have you. Again, the lyrics resonated.
Mm-hmm. Conway is one of the people that I've met in the recording business. Of course, he's not with us anymore, but I did get to spend some time with him. I did get to open for there was a tour that we did. It was Conway Twitty and George Jones, or Conway Twitty and Merle Haggard, and they would switch off every night. You know, who was first and second, and so I got to meet all those guys. And Conway cut songs of mine, George cut songs of mine, Merle did, and he was really one of those people that when he wasn't on stage, and you know, he always struck me as he was a professional. He was a good person. He was like one of those guys you go, I get it. He's like, you know, in my life, almost every day, I like to be able to find some interaction with someone that I see has a lot of value, and be able to go, hey, can I tell you something? Today, you are I want to be more like you person. And I do that as often as I can, whether I know them or not, or whether they know anything about me, right? So Conway was always that, whether I told him, which I did not, but it was always things you see like that, and you go, man, we all need to be more like that. You know, we need to be like that, and so I can totally see him saying that, but you know, now it's. There's very few jukeboxes,
and they're not a quarter anymore.
There's literally not very many. I know where a couple are, We were down in Myrtle Beach doing a show, and we went into this restaurant. It was kind of cool. You could actually do everything with the jukebox they had there electronically through your phone. It was pretty, that was kind of cool. But yeah, so it's a difficult road right now, especially for an independent artist, like myself. I mean, we did the Wyoming album, which got a lot of critical acclaim, but it didn't have a lot of discovery. And what I mean is that there weren't a lot of outlets for people who didn't know what I did to listen to what the album that we made, the songs. And we cut a second record because we were getting such reaction at live performances. I mean, it was stunning. People didn't know what to expect. And then after they did, it was like, we had no idea. I would spend, I don't know how much time after shows talking to people who'd seen what I did before and are just like, man, it's like, we like this even better. It's like, what are you going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And now we've been able, thanks to some really caring people, to add radio promotions to what we're doing. So, the single Road Dog, which we talked about briefly, is really a dog singing the song. It's, for me, it's Shotgun singing the song, and he's named by the way for the seat that he likes to occupy. He's now so big, it's very difficult for him to sit in the front seat and be completely in the chair. We got to stuff stuff down on the floor so we can put his paws on top of it when we're out here on the ranch or whatever. And so that's gone to radio, and suddenly it's like we've had a reaction on something that's just fun. It's just fun, but it's true to life. I think it's, I can't imagine almost any dog owner not understanding every part of that song. And it's up tempo, it's fun, and radio is accepting it, to a certain degree, and so now, for instance, Michael, I'm going to be able to go in. The next project that we do is not going to be an album. It's going to be a grouping of songs, whatever we can get in the studio with certain players. And we're going to be making that record for radio purposefully. But when I say that, what I mean is there's a sonic presence, there's a production presence on more expensive records that happen. The instrumentation on those records is part of what's defining the genre. But that doesn't mean that I have to leave melody behind for groove. It doesn't mean that what my belief is, it doesn't mean that I have to leave any lyrical integrity behind at all and speak to what I believe is where we're, is where we're human. And that's what I'm looking forward to that. Is there going to be, is the instrumentation going to be like classic country? No, it's not even possible at this point, really, on radio to do that. Rare times. Can it incorporate? Can it incorporate elements of that? Can we honor the what's the word? The ancestry, if you will. Can we honor the ancestry of country music by going, well, this is what they're saying country is. I'm only going to be able to be discovered if I'm on the radio and people are hearing it. So I have to believe yes. I have to believe yes. I mean, there's not a person who can come see my show that is not going to know that I listen to Merle Haggard. But they're also going to hear music that they don't expect. I mean, places we go that they don't expect. It sometimes surprises people because of the kind of band. If we have the acoustic band, it is fun. It is fun, and I am praying that I'm given the opportunity to keep moving towards that, because the doors are opening. They really are, and that's exciting.
That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And tell me this: I want to make sure we don't, gloss over, anything here, because on this show we often focus on what I call the art and magic of songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you've got time, I'd like to, go over some of the songs that of yours that have really resonated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Burning a Hole in My Heart.
Just talk about that, you mean? Just tell you what happened?
This is the story. What was the origin of that song?
There were two guys who sang super well together, who were at the same publishing company as I was, and we wrote some songs together. And it made sense when we did that to bring some harmonies in that were what I would call integral to the record. That song where it's singing "I've Got a Love Burning a Hole in My Heart," and they actually came and sang on the record. Yeah, there was a couple things that we wrote together that ended up being on a couple of the records, and that's honestly where it came from. They were both good writers, and I kind of knew I was headed in the direction of being an artist, and what would be that. I'm sure we kicked around how harmonies were going to be. Where we would want to produce, make that happen, and then, kick ideas around and came up with that, and there you go. That's pretty much the inspiration. I would say is the musicality. That musical element was a big part of why we would choose to put the song together that way.
Now, did It's You Again come out of that same session?
No, It's You Again happened later. It's You Again happened. That's at least the second record.
I didn't know because you wrote that with the same two guys, with Woody
and once again, that even when we sing It's You Again, those harmonies are that's part of what we were doing. They're such good singers. It's really fun. It was really fun to do that. Yeah.
Now, what do you remember most about going into the studio to record that first album?
That everyone was smoking too much pot, and I had to say, I can't do it. I can't have all this pot smoke in here. I've gotten to a place where I'm just straight ahead, man. That's that was a fun thing to just toss out there, because that was a thing. That was such a thing. I was a bit overwhelmed. I was nervous, and in a way tried to act like I wasn't, and I was young, man. I mean, I was young, and I was recording in at the time, state-of-the-art recording studio, like I hadn't done. I had worked in studios to put, to do demos and whatever, but that was, and working with just iconic musicians who brought these records to life in certain ways, and they all had their own personality. And I was such a fan of Billy Walker Jr., the acoustic guitar player. And on those albums, remember, I played guitar forever, and I played guitar differently. It's still very much a part of what we do. It helps to drive most of what we do. And I really only had acoustics as a possibility when I was young, and that just continued. But Billy Walker Jr. was so good that he would say, "Okay, now what are you doing there? What are you doing there?" And I would play it for him because it seemed very important that I be in the vocal booth singing this, the melody and the way that, and it affected the whole band. Now we can do some things a little differently because it's digital. You can put a vocal scratch on there and then play everything to it. You don't have to do it multiple times. But then we were doing takes, so every vocal had to be on every take. That was one thing I became such, and the reason I brought Billy up is because that's who produced Brian White, Billy Walker Jr. And gosh, I just learned on the fly. I just soaked up everything I possibly could and tried to emulate what was expected of me. It wasn't always easy, so that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, the other parts of your career that amazes me is the people that you had a chance to write with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like the Hall of Fame of songwriting. Max D and Max T, Dean Dillon, Bill Anderson, Don Schlitz that you mentioned earlier, Jim Weatherly. Yeah. In fact, with Jim, we were talking about, songs being authentic. It can work in multiple formats. Jim was the master. All those hits that he had that Gladys Knight recorded of his.
Midnight Train to Georgia. And
yeah. So what was it like? Obviously you were, young, when you were writing with these folks. What was it like for you to walk in and you're sitting there, writing with, Bill Anderson or somebody who's got this long history?
I started getting to write with people like that after I had written hits, like with Don Sampson. Don wasn't known as a writer. I wasn't known as a writer. And after we had some of that happen, then I was given these opportunities to work. And I soaked in the energy. I would literally study who I was writing with while I was writing with them. What kind of things would they say? How would they come to the song? Certain writers, for instance, they didn't want to play. They didn't want to bring a guitar or anything. They just wanted me to handle the music because of the way I played guitar. Some were really, where we had conversations, like conversations behind the song more than someone else who might just come in with an idea. And these are all valid. These are all valid approaches because I want to have every tool I possibly can to be able to bring what's needed to a song. There were. It's almost like there are some famous writers who were good at steering the ship, if that makes any sense. The big picture. They weren't about the line. They didn't necessarily come up with the hook sometimes or the lines in the song sometimes, but they knew where we needed to go. This is a very important element in songwriting. And some people can be, when it comes to what they do, when they do it, they don't even think about it. They just do it. It's just what they do. There are some, writers who get married very quickly to what they bring and not what other people bring. And that sometimes works and it often doesn't. So for instance, that, when I'd seen that, and that's not necessarily the famous writers you spoke about. I'm just telling you because I think that's where you're interested in is that. And so, you get some writers are really fast to get married up to something that they think is really good, and I am liquid until it's crystal. I don't get married to anything. I've literally worked, and to his credit, James Dean Hicks and I wrote a song for Randy Travis called The Hole. It was a hit. It was in the movie Deep Impact. Cool record. They made a really cool record. We had worked on some other hook. I have no idea what it was. We had worked for the better part of the day. And got around and we were writing lines in this song. It just wasn't working for me. And, James was kind of like, we were sort of a little stymied, and somehow there was something that we were working with that alluded to "You Can't Dig Out of the Hole." It was something like that. It wasn't exactly. And I said, we wrote all this. We wrote all day to get there. That's what we need. He said, what do you mean? And the minute that I said that, James was like, oh shit. And so we already had some music, and we took that, and then all that effort that we put in around it. See ya. See ya. Don't care about that. It doesn't serve anything about this song, only this. And that is a super important thing. And as far as I'm concerned, I throw away 100 times, without exaggeration, I throw away 100 times more than ever finds its way into a finished song. And anymore, I don't even finish things that I don't think are going to be everything they can be. I just don't. And I've been writing, all this new stuff I wrote 100% of, and I've loved it. I did so much co-writing. And I wrote with some pretty amazing people that you just wouldn't expect. I talked with, I got to write with Keb Mo, the blues. Mm-hmm. He's a blues incredible. He's incredible. He really is. Like I say, he's one of the coolest people on the planet. Plays guitar incredibly well, sings incredibly well. He's got an amazing heart. I got to write with Maya Angelou, the poet.
I was going to ask you, how did that come about?
It came about. She made an appearance in Nashville, and I just called. I just called her folks just to say, would you please pass along to her from me that was absolutely stunning. As a writer, that's what I do. Pass along. There was a lot of familiarity with me in Nashville at the time. I didn't know Maya Angelou knew who I was. Well, what happened is her people said that, and Maya called me back. Wow. and asked me if I'd be willing to write with her, which, I was stunned. And I said, of course, and ended up going down to her place in the South there, one time there and one time up in New York. And we worked on, some of what she already had going on. We worked on a couple of her more famous poems and literally wrote some verses that were, supported to try to help, turn that into a song. She was someone that I study everyone, and to be around that energy, who she was, how she carried herself, everything. I've written with some incredible jazz musicians who I just, I listen to their musical sensitivity, and, have written with people whose musicianship is far above my own. Like I wrote a song with Keith Urban, Matt Rawlings, and Matt is a piano player. He was producing something for Keith Urban at the time. And we wrote a song called "I Thought You Knew" that I really liked that song. I really still, well, of course I still do. And for instance, Matt is I think still one of the best musicians on the planet. I put him in the same kind of leagues as Yo-Yo Ma in his situation. He's a hero of mine. I've listened to everything because of the way he offers what he does. He's a master on the cello, but it's not just that. I can hear his heart when Yo-Yo plays. Matt was brilliant. He was played on so many records. And so there's that element that we don't always talk about. The musical sensitivity, the idea that might spark from a movement. So I study that all the time. I played so many different types of music. I tuned my guitars every way you can think of. Just use capos and tune guitars, and then also just play it, like it is. Go from here. Go from an instrument. And sometimes I know, again, I'm moving away, but I'm trying to give you, if I only talk about certain people, it's difficult, because a lot of the writers that you just talked about are similar. They think of these, they're really, it's not just whatever, it's not, we just go in there, it takes me sometimes weeks. I'll have an idea and I'll go, there's something in that. I need to study that, or I need to figure out how I can say that in such a, I'll give you an example. Maybe this will help. Out here, because I live in northwestern Wyoming, up where it's, I say it's like the Tetons in Yellowstone National Park. Put that in a bucket and dump it in my backyard. And that's pretty much where I live. And out here, for whatever reason, the indigenous people in Wyoming, which I think is between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, made petroglyphs, rock carvings, scratchings in the rock. And there's hundreds and hundreds of them. Everything from one this big to one 3 feet or 4 feet big. And my wife said to me one day, she said, honey, you need to write a song about petroglyphs. And I said, well, that's country. but she's so, she's sensitive in her own right. And I said, I don't know. But if you say it, I'll look into it. Well, I did. I just got to thinking, why is that powerful? Why are we fascinated with that? Why are, our ancestors, that's powerful to a lot of us. You can't be around it without seeing it and go, like cave drawings or whatever. For instance, it struck me, it's not the petroglyph. It's not the petroglyph. It's the journey. Again, here's the approach. It's the journey of this human who came to draw this petroglyph. What was that led to that art? Because likely, and I don't think anybody really knows, but likely it was an expression of their spiritual growth and development. They had to do this in order to be part of their tribe or community. And who knows? I don't know if it was all women or all men, or I have no idea. So I had to kind of think about that. And I didn't think of it one way. I just thought of it as another human who is was basically doing the same thing I do, coming on some kind of spiritual journey in a way and offering what they had to offer in a way that was, and of course that had to be accepted by community. There was reasons, but we don't know what they are. In fact, scientists learn more about so here's again, I went to study. I studied for this song, right? Scientists learn more about the earth in front of the rock than they do from the scratching, from the etching, from the anything. And of course, as soon as I say that, most people go, oh, that makes sense. Could have dropped tools, could have, whatever. And so then I had to think about, okay, so the only person who can tell the story is the actual petroglyph. The only thing that's still around that knows, what would that rock carving, what does that have to share with us if that were the eyes, And then I went, but can I write a song that is a petroglyph singing the song? Is that, okay, now this is a big step, from There's a Stranger in My Mirror for Randy Travis. Okay, this is, and I didn't know how to approach it musically, but it had to have some kind of indigenous element. And I took this big, it's like a guitar and a half, is what it is. It's a baritone guitar. It's tuned lower than a regular guitar. And I started messing with that, thinking about how it feels. And I wrote a completely, something that basically made sense, a musical environment that made sense for a petroglyph to sing. But the more I got into it, the more I started recognizing all of the choices that were in and around this art and the journeys of those humans and how we're once again similar. So if you go and listen to the Wyoming record, there's a song on it called Petroglyph. We play it at almost every show. It has a really interesting musical interlude that in the lyrics is just, it says dream sequence. That's what it is right there. It's like right when the guy is, hasn't eaten in so long, hasn't had anything to drink, and the petroglyphs telling the story. And, but it's easy for me to say that song is not really about a petroglyph. It is as much about the threat of nuclear war as it is to the loss of those indigenous people or anything else. It's still the decisions that humans are making. We're still on the same journey. And so yeah, that's taking a chance. Am I going to put that song out for radio? No. When I go into the studio and cut for radio, I know there's a space that I have to be in. Am I going to sometimes have some things that are way different on record so that I can offer something artistic like Petroglyph or Railroad? Yes. Like Railroad, I went and studied the Transcontinental Railroad for, watched the whole series of Hell on Wheels. I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you haven't seen it, really good, Anson Mount. Anyway, I've been very talkative, but your conversations are bringing up, some things like that, and I am trying to give you some content that's at least unique to me.
Well, I appreciate that. As I said, I try to keep this where it's not just, okay, Skip, tell me this. Yeah, I would say I want viewers and listeners to feel like they're just eavesdropping in on you and I talking about something that we both love, music. So that said, I'm going to jump forward to your two most current records, which I think are the two best you've ever made.
Well, thank you. I think that has a lot to do with Kyle Lenning.
Well, you know what? To that, if I may, you've got different types of producers. Again, this is just my own opinion. Okay. You've got producers who put their stamp on something, and when you listen to it, doesn't matter who the artist is, you can hear it and go, that was produced by so and so. That was produced by this person. Kyle has his talent is to make the artist sound more like themselves, for lack of a better description, to where you hear it, he makes sure everything is sonically pure, everything is done just right. There are no bad Kyle Lenning produced records out there, none. But when you hear it, it is the artist that you hear first.
Kyle is brilliant. So for those of you listening, Kyle Lenning is the producer behind all of the original Randy Travis hits. Later in Randy's career, some other people, James Stroud, I think, may have done some production with him. But do you know, I had 3 or 4 of the songs written where I realized I was going to make a record and my wife wanted me to. And I said, out of the blue, I think I need to produce this with Kyle Lenning. She said, who's Kyle? I told her who it was. And I'd only really met Kyle twice. He called me to come play guitar on the song "If I Didn't Have You," which was the hit that we wrote for the Greatest Hits project. And this was a surprise to me. It was the same day he called me and he said, "Can you come down to the studio, because the way you've played this, it's not possible for us to get this right away. It's different." I thankfully have some comes together differently. So I went down there and did that, and I loved being in the studio. I liked Kyle immediately, and Randy, And then at the number 1 party, the only other thing I remember saying to him was, "What would have happened if I hadn't been in town?" And he said, "We just cut something else." Oh man, right? And so that's pretty much the only communication I had with him since that record. And I called him out of the blue and I said, Kyle, I know we haven't spoken. I have this is the journey, and I'm wondering if you would like to produce this with me. And he's not a co-producer kind of guy either so much. But when he heard the music, he called me back and he said, when would you like to cut? And the best relationship with anyone I've ever had in the studio is with Kyle. Just the musical journey of everything we did together. I mean, from the decisions about what was going to happen, who was going to play where, and even when I would have some idea, like the dream sequence in Petroglyph, or he would have an idea, what if we don't have guitar play that? Let's have, and Kyle comes and sits in the studio with us. He doesn't stay at the board by the engineer. He literally comes in, puts headphones, and just sits in the studio with us when we record. And we were, it was like we'd worked together for 20 years, and we could just immediately stay. We would be so many times, and he'll tell you, I don't know how many times I would take notes, quick note while we're listening or whatever, and he would say literally what I wrote as the note, and it would be, not just normal stuff. It's like, how does that happen, right? And vice versa, and we loved working together. And I think that Kyle is one of the most brilliant producers ever. And I do agree with what you're saying. It's also because of what he brings in inspiration to musicians who are in the studio. When Kyle and I are working together, the musicians are party to a lot of what we were talking about. On these first two records, they're all of it's done, together. And we took some musical chances. I mean, we really did. And there was a great deal of mutual respect. And I'm someone that you can say that's not good too. You know what I mean? And I'll go, okay, that's like liquid until it's crystal. But if you don't have the idea, you can't do anything with it. If you don't have a musical idea or a way to adapt a lyric, if something doesn't quite work, and whether that's even sometimes cutting part of the song. When I say cutting, not recording it, but literally losing it. Like, now that we're here, why don't we put a musical interlude and wrap back to the chorus and not repeat, that kind of thing happens all the time. And he really listens a lot. There's a lot of good producers in Nashville, but I enjoy who Kyle is, the energy he brings to the studio, literally to the studio, and everyone. I don't think there's anyone who could work with Kyle or has worked with Kyle or even is familiar with his records that wouldn't say, oh yeah, he's brilliant. So what a thrill for me. What a fortunate thing. I learned so much, from again in producing records. So yeah.
Well, two of the standout songs for me on Road California.
Mm-hmm.
Knots.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that one.
Knots. I told my wife, I said, I think I could do an album, title it Knots, and write songs that every one of them had a different kind of knot. I was messing with it, but the power of that, believe it or not, one of the strongest images and power in that song is gravel in your shoes, in someone's shoes that someone else can't see. So I'll tell you a quick story. That came because I did martial arts for years and years and taught, and my adopted father was the head of a martial arts system. So I was ranked pretty high in that system. And then I want to say it was my fourth degree black belt testing in Taekwondo in Nashville. At the end of my testing, which is pretty grueling to be fourth degree, my Taekwondo instructor, who actually was one of my dad's students too, came to me and said, "Your dad asked me to do something." I said, "What's that?" And I wore shoes because of the kind of floor we have. Martial arts shoes, they're real thin, but they're, it was too easy to slip sometimes on the kind of floor we had, doing jump kicks or whatever. And she said, and he asked me to get some of this gravel from the road and to put it in your shoes. And then you can do any form that you want. And a form, just a movement. Well, my dad's intention was to give me something to overcome. But what happened was, I could have done a very short form. Instead, I did a very long form that was my dad's. It's called a cane form, so it was with a weapon. And it tore my feet up. And when I got finished with it, the entire class, the entire school stood up and gave me an ovation. Miss Westairs, my instructor, told me later, she said, "It's only the second time that's ever happened." But when I thought about it, I was sitting after I sat down and got rid of the gravel. At the end, I was able to speak to the school. And I said, I've been reflecting on what happened, on what happened here. And I said, you guys taught me something that I can see much better. Not because I did some great martial arts form. I was never a great martial artist. I wasn't that kind of an athlete. I was skilled, still am. But I said, I was thinking, why? Why did you do that? Because I did that exact same form earlier in the day as part of my routine. You didn't stand up and clap that time. If I had put that gravel in my shoes then and put those shoes on and you didn't know the gravel was there, you wouldn't have stood up. There would have been nothing to, you're supposed to, you're 4th degree black belt, you're supposed to know, or 5th degree at that point in the weapon system. You're supposed to know that. But you clapped because you knew there was gravel in my shoes. Man, I was trying to figure out a way to get that into a song since then. It's actually there in some other spaces, but not literally. And with knots, I know there's so much difficulty with, mental health. And I don't actually say that this person is a veteran. I allude to it. I don't actually say that. But knots is about the courage to untangle, to work, continue to work on what is hurting you. Because when you're offered that kind of strength to, okay, you know what? I understand why that happens. I understand why you struggle. I really understand, but I respect your effort to heal and not have that happen. And that is hellaciously hard, if I can say that. So in that song, it says, you can't see my future or my past or feel the gravel in my shoes. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to be inside someone's head, but it was a way to say that. And to sometimes maybe say, yeah, I don't know what kind of gravel is there. That is not important to be mental health. That can just be a struggle. That can be an intellectual struggle, an emotional struggle. It can be anything. So it's amazing how often I have been able to use that and go, yeah, I don't know what gravel's there. So I'm going to let that go. Or if it's possible, I'm going to ask about that gravel. And I don't compare my suffering. We're all just different shades of black and blue. It means everyone is hurt. We should never compare our suffering to someone else, in my opinion. We don't know how someone suffers. Someone else can suffer greatly from something that you would go, well, I don't know that would hurt me. It's possible because of how they take it. So to be able to then say, you know, the strength and courage to keep working on these knots that the person is. I know it was taking a chance. I knew it was taking a chance to write that song, but I called Kyle and I said, man, I would really like to have this song on the record. We'd already cut the record. And we put a you know, a group together, and we went in and cut that one song, and it ended up being pretty powerful. You know, of course, it wasn't a radio song, not that it couldn't have been played on the radio, but boy, the amount of people who now come to the shows or have written me and gone, I love that song for these reasons, and I know someone, or I am someone. You know, I think that's the power of art. And once again, it's a space where we're all the same. We're all human. We're all dealing with that all the time. You know, if I can help somebody dump the rocks out, by God, I will.
Again, authenticity.
Well, yes, that is definitely the effort. Absolutely.
Skip, there's so much more we could get into, but I can't think of a better point to wrap this one up talking about that song.
Well, Michael, I appreciate the time that you spent here. I had a wonderful conversation. Let's do it again. Let's do it again sometime. I would love
that sounds great to me.
All
so,
right.
On that note, we've had your social media scrolling across the screen, and the viewers will be able to go to skipewing.com, and all your social media pages will have all that posted. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Everybody have a good night. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Michael.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.